Every day, without fail, an old man sat on the same weathered bench in a quiet suburban park. To most people, he was just another lonely soul passing the time. But when a group of curious kids decided to peek inside the worn leather bag he carried everywhere, they uncovered something so disturbing, it sent shockwaves through the entire community. And when the police arrived, what they found changed everything. Please comment where you're watching us from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notification. Nestled between rows of modest houses and a small elementary school stood Hollow Creek Park, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights flickered on and neighbors exchanged pleasantries while walking their dogs. It was safe, predictable, familiar. That's why when an old man started showing up, sitting silently under the same oak tree day after day, no one thought much of it. He didn't smile. He didn't talk. He just sat, always with the same brown leather satchel, resting at his feet like a shadow he refused to let go of. At first, parents dismissed him as a widower seeking peace. Some whispered he might be homeless, though his clothes, while wrinkled, were always clean. The only constant was his silence. In that bag, children noticed things adults overlook. And soon, the kids who played soccer near his bench started whispering among themselves. Why does he always sit there? Do you think he's watching us? What's in that bag? One brave boy swore he heard ticking noises from inside. Another claimed he saw the old man stroking something, like a doll or a photograph. But no one dared to approach until one afternoon, when curiosity got the better of them. It was a Saturday. The park was busier than usual. The man was in his usual spot, staring blankly at the playground. 3 kids, Ben, Marcus, and Lily, decided to test their courage. They played tag near his bench, circling closer and closer until finally Lily accidentally bumped into the bag with her foot. The man's reaction was immediate. He snatched it up, clutching it tight against his chest, eyes wide and terrified. Not angry, not annoyed, but as if the world would end if that bag left his hands. The kids scattered, giggling nervously, but the seed was planted. By the following week, rumors spread like wildfire. Some parents grew uneasy. Others insisted he was harmless, just lonely. But one mother admitted she'd seen him taking Polaroids of the park late at night. Another swore she'd seen him digging in the wooded area behind the playground. Still, the police never intervened. After all, sitting on a bench with a bag isn't a crime. But everything changed when the kids decided to peek inside. It was late afternoon. The park was almost empty. The man sat slumped, his eyes closed, muttering under his breath. Marcus whispered, "He's asleep." Ben nodded. "Now's our chance." They crept forward. Lily kept watch while Marcus reached out and slowly lifted the flap of a leather satchel. Inside was not what they expected. No snacks, no newspapers, no wallet. Instead, they saw photographs. Dozens of them, all neatly stacked. All of the children. Some laugh on swings. Others walked to school. A few sleeping in their beds. The kids froze, horror prickling their skin. Marcus whispered, "He's been following us." But before they could slam the bag shut, something else caught their eye. A small, cloth-wrapped bundle, tied with string, stained dark. Ben tugged it open, and what fell out made Lily scream. A tiny shoe, covered in dried mud, and something else. The man woke up with a start. His eyes darted to the open bag, then to the children. "Put it back." His voice was sharp, panicked. The kids bolted. Lily's scream carried across the park, drawing the attention of parents. Within minutes, police cars pulled up, lights flashing. Officers surrounded the man, demanding he step away from the bag. He resisted at first, clutching it to his chest, rocking back and forth like a terrified child. But eventually, he let go. When the officers opened the satchel, silence swept over the crowd. Inside were over 50 Polaroid photographs, some decades old. Each one showed children many unrecognizable captures in different settings. Some looked recent. Others had dates scribbled on the back. The oldest dated back to 1983. And then there were the bundles. Not just one, but several. Shoes, small toys, locks of hair, personal items carefully preserved like trophies. The officers exchanged grim looks. This wasn't just odd behavior. This was something darker. When questioned, the man refused to speak. He simply lowered his head, tears streaming down his cheeks. One officer whispered, "He knows what this means." But here's where the mystery deepens. Fingerprints on the photographs didn't match the old man. DNA on the items didn't match him either. So, if the bag wasn't his, then whose was it? News spread within hours. Reporters swarmed the quiet park. Parents clutched their children tightly, horrified that such darkness had sat among them unnoticed. Some insisted the old man must have been the culprit. Others swore he was protecting something or someone, because when detectives pressed him, his only words were, "They told me to keep it safe." Investigators soon discovered the leather bag wasn't new. It had initials burned into the strap. Initials belonging to a man who'd vanished over 20 years ago, a suspect in a series of unsolved child abductions. That man was never caught, never found, until now when his bag resurfaced in the hands of this quiet, broken stranger. Detectives fanned out across the woods behind Hollow Creek Park. Their flashlights sliced through the growing darkness, beams landing on disturbed soil near the base of a gnarled oak. It looked fresh, too fresh. One officer knelt down, running a gloved hand across the mound. The soil crumbled easily, damp from recent rainfall. And sticking out, just barely, was the corner of a box. They called in the crime scene unit immediately. With shovels and care, the box was lifted from the earth. It was heavy, metal, rusted shut. Neighbors pressed against the police tape, some whispering prayers, others clutching their children close. When the lid was finally pried open, gasps echoed through the trees. Inside were more bundles, wrapped in faded cloth, each tied neatly with twine, like someone had preserved them as sacred relics. Photographs, toys, locks of hair, and most chilling of all, what appeared to be handwritten journals. Back at the squad car, the old man watched silently. When he saw the box, his body trembled violently. He buried his face in his hands and whispered one name, Elias. Detectives leaned in. Who was Elias? Was he the man who owned the bag? Where is he now? But the old man refused to answer. He simply rocked back and forth, repeating, "I promised I'd keep it safe. I promised." Inside the journals, investigators found disturbing entries. The handwriting was erratic, slanted, sometimes written in block letters, as if by a different hand altogether. One passage read, "They never look twice at the quiet ones. The park is perfect for families distracted, children everywhere. Collecting their joy is easier than anyone thinks." Another chilling line. "If anyone ever finds this, it means I've failed, but the bag will keep them safe. Safe from the truth." The signature at the bottom? Elias K. Detectives dug into old case files from the 1980s and 90s. The name Elias K. matched an Elias Crane, a drifter who was once the prime suspect in at least 5 child disappearances. But every time police closed in, Elias vanished, leaving no trace except whispers and fear. And then, nothing. No sightings. No arrests. It was as if he disappeared into thin air. Until now, when his journals and bag surfaced in Hollow Creek. If Elias Crane was gone, did that mean the old man was his accomplice? Or worse, his final victim, manipulated into carrying the weight of his secrets? Neighbors who once pitied the old man now stared with suspicion. Some shouted at the police to arrest him. Others begged them to protect him, insisting he was just a broken soul haunted by something too dark to explain. But detectives couldn't ignore one thing: the fresh dirt under the old man's nails. 2 days later, cadaver dogs were brought to the park. They circled the oak tree, then pulled toward another patch of ground, about 15 feet deeper into the woods. Officers marked the spot, shovels in hand. The crowd grew restless, the air thick with dread. Minutes later, one shovel hit something solid. A muffled thud echoed. The earth gave way, revealing a second container. But this one wasn't a box. It was a coffin. Small, child-sized. The moment the coffin was unearthed, the old man began screaming. Not words, just raw, guttural wails of grief, like a man reliving the worst moment of his life. He clawed at the squad car window, begging to be let out, sobbing, "Not them, not them." Detectives rushed to open the coffin. Inside lay a doll, an old porcelain doll, its face cracked, its dress stained with time. Resting on its lap was another journal, this one newer than the others. The handwriting was shaky, inconsistent, as if written by someone much older. The first page read, "I couldn't stop him. I wanted to, but he said if I spoke, they'd never find peace. So I carried them, year after year, piece by piece, hoping one day someone would understand." The final entry was chilling. "They think I'm a monster, but I only ever kept the memories." He kept the children. Police realized something shocking. The old man wasn't Elias Crane. He was Arthur Hale, a retired schoolteacher who went missing briefly in 1992, around the same time Elias vanished from the radar. Arthur had returned years later, broken and silent, never explaining where he'd been. And now, with the journals and evidence, detectives suspected the unthinkable. Arthur might have been forced to act as the keeper of Elias Crane's trophies. But if that was true, where was Elias now? Detectives swarmed Arthur's cell, looking for answers. There were no pens, no pencils, no chalk, yet the words were scrawled clearly in black across the wall, almost like ink but smeared, as though written with trembling hands. Arthur sat quietly on the edge of his cot, his face pale. One detective asked, "Did you write this?" Arthur shook his head, slowly, his eyes locked on the wall, as though he were afraid to look away. Finally, he whispered, "He doesn't need my hands anymore." Authorities were split. Some believed Arthur was losing his grip on reality, haunted by years of carrying Elias Crane's secrets. Others swore there was more to it, that someone had gotten inside. But how? The cell was secure. Cameras were always rolling. Except, when detectives reviewed the footage from the night the writing appeared, something unnerving surfaced. For exactly 2 minutes, the cameras glitched. Just static. And when the feed returned, the words were on the wall. Back at the evidence locker, investigators examined the most recent journal recovered from the coffin in the woods. One page stood out. It read, "I told him where to go if I ever failed." The bag was just the beginning. The park was only one of many. He's clever. He never leaves everything in one place. At the bottom of the page, barely legible, was an address. It belonged to a house, an abandoned one, only 3 miles from Hollow Creek Park. The next day, officers entered the decaying house. The windows were boarded. The walls were covered in mold. But inside, they found rooms that told a disturbing story. One bedroom had rows of Polaroids tacked to the walls. Not just of children, but of Arthur Hale himself. Arthur at the grocery store. Arthur feeding pigeons. Arthur sitting on that same park bench. Elias had been watching him. For years, when confronted with the photographs, Arthur broke down in tears. He admitted that Elias had once been his friend. They'd met decades ago, when Arthur was a young teacher. Elias had been charming, persuasive, and soon Arthur realized Elias's interests were far darker than friendship. Arthur tried to walk away, but Elias threatened him, threatened his students, threatened his family. So Arthur carried the burden of his secrets, too terrified to speak. But he insisted. "I haven't seen him since 1992. I thought he was gone." Then he looked at the detectives, his voice shaking. "If the writing's on that wall, then he isn't." Forensic teams combed through the abandoned house. In the basement, they found something that made even hardened officers turn pale. A hidden room, soundproofed. Inside were small chairs, shackles, and boxes filled with toys and clothes. But here's the terrifying part. Some of the items were new, too new to have been placed there decades ago. Someone had been in that house recently. When news of the discovery leaked, Hollow Creek erupted in fear. Parents refused to let their children outside. Reporters camped near the park, demanding answers. The idea that Elias Crane could still be alive and still stalking the same community was almost too much to bear. Some neighbors turned their anger on Arthur, convinced he was lying. Others defended him, insisting he was just another victim. But the police knew one thing for sure. The journals hinted at more locations. And if Elias was still alive, time was running out. Late one night, a detective stayed behind at the precinct, poring over the journals. As he flipped through a worn page, he froze. A Polaroid slipped out one that hadn't been logged with the others. It showed a child, smiling, holding a balloon, and scrawled on the back were 5 words: "See you at the park." The detective's hands shook as he realized the photo wasn't old. The child in the picture had been reported missing just 3 days ago. To be continued in part 2. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on notification. Thanks for watching.